Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 36 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, third canto. We are in the 12th chapter of the third canto, and we are continuing on from verse 36, it looks like to me. Or maybe it's 35. So there we go, devotees. Okay, first of all, our prayers though. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaniti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyatyadesh Dharane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakapacharubhyas Kripa Sindhubhyeva Cha Paditanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Okay, devotees, so day 36 of our seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, third canto. We're in chapter 12, which is titled Creation of the Kumars and Others. And we are beginning from about 36. Let me just check here. 36 it is. 36. Okay, so that means we are in the 6th section of the 12th chapter. The 6th section is from verse 34 to 38, and we call this section Brahma Establishes Vedic Knowledge. Okay, and we're going on from verse 36. Vidura said, O great sage, whose only wealth is penance, kindly explain to me how and with whose help Brahma established the Vedic knowledge which emanated from his mouth. There's no purport here. Verse 37, Maitreya said, beginning from the front face of Brahma, gradually the 4 Vedas, Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva, became manifest. Thereafter Vedic hymns which had not been pronounced before, priestly rituals, the subject matters of the recitation, and transcendental activities were all established, one after another. There's no purport, verse 38. He also created the medical science, military art, musical art, and architectural science, all from the Vedas. They all emanated one after another, beginning from the front face. So, yes, there's a short purport here. Prabhupada explains the Vedas contain all necessary knowledge, perfect knowledge for humanity. Not only here, but actually on all places and for all times. Yeah, like the military science is also needed, unfortunately. And music also. Architecture. Prabhupada says all these groups of knowledge are called the Upa Purana, or supplements of the Vedas. This term Upa Purana, it can be used, it is used sometimes, to refer to books which are sort of connected with the Puranas. Yeah, but they're not on the same level as the regular Puranas, so they're called Upa Puranas, which means supplementary or near to, close to Puranas, close to in the sense of physically, or supplements of the Vedas. And Prabhupada makes the point, spiritual knowledge is the main topic of the Vedic literatures. But to help people, other information is given also, which forms, for the people, necessary branches of Vedic knowledge. And then very interesting, very important, verse 39. Then he created the fifth Veda, the Puranas and the histories, from all his mouths, since he could see all the past, present, and future. I could just mention that there, in some circles, kind of strict, rigid Vedic circles, they think that the Puranas and the Itihasas, the histories, Mahabharata, Ramayana, that these are all like post-Vedic. They're not really Vedic. They're just sort of related with the Vedic literatures, particularly Rig, Sama, Yajur, and Atharva, the four main Vedas. But actually here, it's being stated very clearly that the Puranas and the Itihasas are the fifth Veda. And this is coming from the Lord himself. Right, so anyway, the thing is, Prabhupada's short purport, we have histories, of course, of different countries, American history, British history, etc., etc. But the Puranas, they're historical, but they're histories of the universe. And not just for one millennium or sort of the current period or some immediate previous period, but many kalpas going way, way back. So Lord Brahma knows all of these. So Puranas then are called or known as histories. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, as originally composed by Brahma, they're part of the Vedas and are called the fifth Veda. All right, verse 40. All the different varieties of fire sacrifices, Shodashi, Ukta, Purishi, Agnishtoma, Aptoryama, Atiratra, Vajapaya, and Gosava. So all these different varieties of fire sacrifices became manifested from the eastern mouth of Brahma. There's no purport here, verse 41. Education, charity, penance, and truth are said to be the four legs of religion. And to learn this, there are four orders of life with different classifications of castes according to vocation. Vocation meaning the type of occupational duty you have. Brahma created all these in systematic order. The four legs of religion then, the Prabhupada says the nucleus of the four social orders, brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyas, the nucleus of them is the four legs of religion. So that the vocational divisions, meaning divisions in terms of occupational duties, are the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Sudras. And these were all systematically planned and created by Brahma with the goal of promoting self-realization. Student life is there for the best education, household life for sense gratification, with a charitable mentality, retirement for penance and spiritual advancement, and renounced life for preaching the absolute truth to the people in general. So the the combination of all these, Prabhupada says, makes the situation favorable for uplifting the mission of human life. In the beginning, of course, it's based on education for purifying the animal propensities. All the little children, all they know is how to eat, sleep. That's basically it. Eat, sleep, and cry. So education has to be there for bringing them to the level of mature human beings. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the highest purificatory process is knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the purest of the pure. Verse 42. Then the thread ceremony for the twice-born was inaugurated, as were the rules to be followed for at least 1 year after acceptance of the Vedas, rules for observing complete abstinence from sex life, vocations in terms of Vedic injunctions, various professional duties in household life, and the method of maintaining a livelihood without anyone's cooperation by picking up rejected grains. Okay, so we have a purport here. The brahmacharis, student life, they're given full instructions about the importance of the human form of life. And that education is to encourage them to become free from family encumbrances, so that even if they do take up family life, they'll understand that in due course I must get out of it and not just stay here until I rot, and even ideally avoid family life. So therefore we find in Vedic society, particularly amongst the Kshatriyas, sometimes amongst others, they had more than one wife. It was not unusual. Some had multiple wives. Why? Not because there was a shortage of young men who could become married, but because there was quite a number of young men who, after going through Gurukul, they decided, I'm not going to marry, I'm just going to keep focused on my Krishna consciousness. So anyway, only those students who are unable to accept a vow of celibacy, they were allowed to go home and marry. Otherwise, the students would remain celibate for the whole life. It just depends on their training, the quality of their training, the directions in their training. Plus also their own tendencies. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, we had the opportunity to meet an avowed brahmachari in the personality of our spiritual master, Om Vishnupad Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Goswami Maharaj. Such a great soul is called a Naishtika brahmachari. Okay, very good. On to verse 43. The 4 divisions of retired life. This now means vanaprastha life. There are 4 divisions of vanaprastha life. They are the Vaikanasas, the Valakilyas, Audumbaras, and Penapas. The 4 divisions of the renounced order of life, sannyas, are the Kutichakas, Bhavodas, Hangsas, and Nishkriyas. All of these were manifested from Brahma. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada makes the point that the system of Varnashram is not a new invention, as some foolish people say, but rather was established by Lord Brahma, as we see right here, by Lord Brahma at the time of creation. And the authenticity and antiquity, you could say, of Varnashram is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verse 13. Prabhupada makes reference to it here. Krishna says, Chatavanya Maya Shishtam, these 4 Varnas were created by me. Maya, by me. Shishtam means created. Okay, so on we go, devotees. 44. The science of logical argument, the Vedic goals of life, and also law and order, moral codes, and the celebrated hymns, Bu, Bhuva, and Swa, all became manifested from the mouths of Brahma, and the Pranava Omkar was manifested from his heart. There's no purport. Verse 45. Thereafter, the art of literary expression, Ushnik. Thereafter, the art of literary expression, Ushnik, was generated from the hairs on the body of the Almighty Prajapati. That's Lord Brahma. The principal Vedic hymn, Gayatri, was generated from the skin. Trishtup, from the flesh. Anushtup, from the veins. And Jagati, from the bones of the Lord of the living entities. 46. Well, there's no purport to 45, so 46. The art of writing verse, Pankti, became manifested from the bone marrow, and that of Brihati, another type of verse, was generated from the life breath of the Lord of the living entities. There's no purport here. We go on to verse 47. Brahma's soul was manifested as the touch, alphabets, his body as the vowels, his senses as the sibilant alphabets, his strength as the intermediate alphabets, and his sensual activities as the 7 notes of music. Phew, Krishna. Okay. So what Srila Prabhupada does here, he goes into this in some detail. He does. Let's just have a look at how he puts things. So, first point is Sanskrit is a more complex language on all levels, in all respects. And the very first level is that there are more letters. In English, I think it's 26, is it? Something like that. In Sanskrit, there are 48 letters, 13 vowels, 35 consonants. Vowel means like A, O, E. Consonants means B, C, D, these letters. So Srila Prabhupada explains the system in detail. The vowels are, he lists them out, A, I, U, Ri, Li, A, I, O, Ow. How's that? And the consonants, 35 of them, are K, K, G, K. But then Prabhupada doesn't go through them all. So amongst the consonants, though, the first 25 letters are called the sparshas. There are also 4 antastas. Of the ushmas, there are 3 S's called talavya, murdanya, and dantya. The musical notes, maybe you're familiar with this, the musical notes. Shari Gama Da Ni. Okay. Oh, Krishna. So, yes. And all of these, this is a very important point, all these sound vibrations are originally called Shabda Brahma, spiritual sound. So now that should be noted. You know, you may, or I don't know if you're going to be tested on it, I don't know. But, I mean, this is such an important point that Sanskrit comes from the spiritual world. And Srila Jiva Goswami, when he begins his grammar book, or books, 2 books, on Sanskrit grammar, the first point he makes, more or less, is that Sanskrit has just built into it an inherently spiritual nature. So just in talking it, speaking it, reading it, there is spiritual value. No matter, just if you get a list of letters, for example, it has spiritual value. Whereas, of course, like English, we're using English here. It has spiritual value when it's talking about Krishna, but when it's talking about worldly politics and just worldly affairs, whatever, then there's no spiritual value whatsoever. So Jiva Goswami makes that point that there is inherent spiritual value in Sanskrit, whereas for other languages it depends on the usage. All right, so and Prabhupada, he explains that Brahma was created in the Mahakalpa as the incarnation of spiritual sound. The Vedas are spiritual sound, so there's no need of material interpretation for the sound vibration of the Vedic literature. The Vedas should be vibrated as they are, basically, just as they are. Yes. So, although they're symbolically represented with letters, which are known materially. So, of course, ultimately nothing is material. Everything has its origin in the spiritual world. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the material manifestation is therefore called illusion in the proper sense of the term. For those who are realized souls, there's nothing but spirit. Right. So, okay, let's move on to verse 48. Brahma is the personal representation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the source of transcendental sound, and is therefore above the conception of manifested and unmanifested. Brahma is the complete form of the absolute truth, and is invested with multifarious energies. This means Lord Brahma, yes. I mean, what a special person. Such a special person, the complete form of the absolute truth. Okay, so let's go through the purport here. Brahma's post is the highest responsible post in the universe, and it's only offered to the most perfect person in the universe. And even if there's no suitable candidate, then sometimes the Lord himself has to become Brahma. So therefore, in the material world, though, he's the complete representative of the Lord. And transcendental sound, pranava, comes from him. And therefore, of course, he's invested with so many energies, multifarious energies, from which all the demigods like Indra, Chandra, Varuna, etc., etc., and etc., and etc., etc., all the demigods, means lots of demigods, they're all manifested. So therefore, Prabhupada makes the point that Lord Brahma's transcendental value is never not to be minimized, despite the incident with his daughter. Prabhupada concludes the purport of verse 48 by saying, there's a purpose for the exhibition of such a tendency by Brahma, and he is not to be condemned like an ordinary living entity. Okay, so devotees, we move on now to the last section, section 7, verse 49 to verse 57. It's a long chapter, this one, 57 verses. And this one we call the appearance of Swayambhuva Manu and Shatarupa. Verse 49 to verse 57. Okay, let's read through the verses. 49. Thereafter Brahma accepted another body in which sex life was not forbidden, and thus he engaged himself in the matter of further creation. Verse 50. O son of the Kurus, when Brahma saw that in spite of the presence of sages of great potency, there was no sufficient increase in population, he seriously began to consider how the population would be increased, because this is his service. I mean, at this stage at least, this is his service. Increase the population, get people, engage them in increasing the population. Verse 50, verse 51. Brahma thought to himself, alas, it is wonderful that in spite of my being scattered all over, there is still insufficient population throughout the universe. There's no other cause for this misfortune but destiny. 52. While he was thus absorbed in contemplation and was observing the supernatural power, two other forms were generated from his body. They're still celebrated as the body of Brahma. Verse 53. The two newly separated bodies united together in a sexual relationship. Out of them, The one who had the male form became known as the Manu named Swayambhuva, and the woman became known as Shatarupa, the queen of the great soul Manu, of Swayambhuva Manu. 55. Thereafter, by sex indulgence, they gradually increased generations of population, one after another. Quite amazing, isn't it? O son of Bharat, in due course of time, he, Manu, begot in Shatarupa 5 children, 2 sons, Priyavrata and Uttanapad, and 3 daughters, Akuti, Devahuti, and Prasuti. 57, last verse. In the chapter, the father, Manu, handed over his first daughter, Akuti, to the sage Ruchi, the middle daughter, Devahuti, to the sage Kardama, and the youngest, Prasuti, to Daksha. From them, all the world filled with population. Okay, so devotees, let us now go through this last section, verse 49 to 57, with purports. 49. Thereafter Brahma accepted another body in which sex life was not forbidden, and thus he engaged himself in the matter of further creation. Okay, so we have a short purport here. In his former body, which was transcendental, sex life was forbidden. So in order to engage in sex life, he had to take another body. And then he continued on with further work of creation. And that former body, the transcendental body, now he's taken another body, for which procreation is allowed. But the former body, transcendental body, transformed into fog. 50. O son of the Kurus, when Brahma saw that in spite of the presence of sages of great potency, there was no sufficient increase in population, he seriously began to consider how the population could be increased. Brahma thought to himself, alas, it is wonderful that in spite of my being scattered all over, there is still insufficient population throughout the universe. There's no other cause for this misfortune but destiny. 52. While he was thus absorbed in contemplation and was observing the supernatural power, 2 other forms were generated from his body. They're still celebrated as the body of Brahma. So Srila Prabhupada explains, just very short purport, that a male body and a female body came out of Brahma. It's not possible to explain their source. So until today, they're still known as Kayam, or the body of Brahma. And Prabhupada says there's no indication of their relationship as if the male is his son and the female is his daughter. They're just 2 bodies. 53. The 2 newly separated bodies united together in a sexual relationship. 54. Out of them, the one who had a male form became known as the Manu named Swayambhuva, and the woman became known as Shatarupa, the queen of the great soul Manu. 55. Thereafter, by sex indulgence, they gradually increase generations of population, one after another. 56. O son of Bharat, in due course of time, he, Manu, Swayambhuva Manu, begot in Shatarupa 5 children, 2 sons, Priyavrata and Uttanapad, and 3 daughters, Akuti, Devahuti, and Prasuti. 57. The father, Manu, handed over his first daughter, Akuti, to the sage Ruchi, the middle daughter, Devahuti, to the sage Kardama, and the youngest, Prasuti, to Daksha. From them, all the world filled with population. So, yes, Srila Prabhupada gives a fairly short purport. So this, he says, the history of the creation of the population of the universe is given herewith. There you go. Brahma's the original being. From him came Swayambhuva Manu and his wife, Shatarupa. Like we mentioned, Prabhupada mentioned, that even though they're coming from one person, Brahma, they shouldn't be considered brother and sister. They're not brother and sister. They're just a male and a female, coming from Lord Brahma for the purpose of procreation. So from them came 2 sons, 3 daughters, and from them all the population in the universe has come. So therefore Lord Brahma is the grandfather of everyone, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who's the father of Lord Brahma, is the great-grandfather of everyone. And Prabhupada concludes the purport and concludes the chapter by quoting Bhagavad Gita chapter 11 verse 39, which the translation is, "You, Krishna, you are the Lord of air, the supreme justice Yama, the fire, and the Lord of rains. You are the moon, and you are the great-grandfather. Therefore I offer my respectful obeisances unto you again and again." So there you go, devotees. Sorry if this session was a bit shorter than usual. Normally we do a full hour, even a few minutes more. But anyway, we've finished the subject matter. We'll get into chapter 13 of this 3rd canto. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.